Jarredine. I am the co-head of Carbon Trust Africa, an associate director with Carbon Trust. We are a global organization. We're operating across Europe, Southeast Asia, Africa and South America predominantly. We're a mission-led organization, and our mission is to accelerate the shift to a low-carbon and decarbonized future.
Tell us more about all your functions that you have in your organization.
So we have a few what we call practice areas that span across the organization, and again we focus on different areas and different regions based on the needs, so really trying to respond to the needs. So I'll focus on the Africa region. So we do some work with corporate clients, so in manufacturing and industry, as well as in sustainable finance. So we work a lot with mining organizations in South Africa and in the region, with manufacturing and ICT, and then also with financial institutions. And a lot of that work is focused on helping them understand their emissions profile and looking for opportunities where they can decarbonize, so through their value chains and their direct operations. And then we also do work in, I suppose, more the public sector space, or what we think of as kind of manifesto. So that's really impact-driven, mission-driven kind of work. And there we work a lot on energy transitions. And so the focus of that is moving towards renewables-led electricity systems in particular, but also looking more broadly at energy use and how we can decarbonize that. And then we have a strong focus on energy access through our ventures and innovation work, and that is focused on ensuring that there is affordable and reliable access to clean energy, and this is very much in line with the Sustainable Development Goal 7.
Can you give us some examples of case studies, success stories that you're excited about?
Yeah, sure. So as the African team from our South African office, we recently finished working with the World Bank and some other partners, including the CSIR and Meridian Economics, to develop South Africa's offshore wind roadmap. So that should be published in the next couple of months. That's quite exciting. There is quite a lot of opportunity for offshore wind for South Africa along our entire coastline. So it gives a lot of opportunities for, again, decarbonization, but just diversification around the energy sources. It gives a lot of economic opportunities, particularly around green hydrogen, and looking at high energy use. So there's a lot of talk about data centers, which would be high energy users, and other industrial processes, and offshore wind gives a good opportunity to provide those with clean energy. We did also last year complete a study around the community ownership of renewable energy, and that was quite interesting. It was quite a preliminary study, high level, so in some ways gave us more questions than answers, but we do want to do more work on that, because I think some of the key findings around that were considering that if development is the objective, to really ensure that we give access to energy to communities, and even in South Africa, because affordability in particular is a challenge in South Africa, what are different models that we can leverage to make that happen, and particularly looking at innovative climate finance opportunities around leveraging or enabling rather community ownership. And then I think the last couple to mention, we have our Transforming Energy Access program. So this is a program across sub-Saharan Africa that we operate, very focused on energy access as well, and it looks at the development of technologies and business models that enable an inclusive energy transition. So this is a wide program that we operate in conjunction with the UK government in this case, and some other philanthropic funding. And then we have our Powering Renewable Energy Opportunities, or our PRIO program. This is also focused on innovation and incubation of SMMEs, so looking at local ideas and helping incubate them into operation, but focused particularly on a productive use of energy. So looking at cooling, again energy access, so different innovations to actually get energy to help with the productive use in the economy and help build economic growth off the back of renewable energy.
Let's talk about policies and regulations. Are these amenable to investments? Does that help to up the interest of, for example, the private sector to get involved?
So I think in some cases, yes, in some cases, no. Again, it differs from country to country across the regions that we work in. In South Africa, we've obviously seen a big shift in policy that is making it more possible for people to invest and come into the space and build up more green economic opportunities. I think that there are still some challenges not directly related to, let's say, energy policy specifically, but looking at some of our economic policies, some of our localization policies, these can still be a little bit challenging. So getting the supply chains up and running, and it can in some ways make the cost quite prohibitive. But I do believe there's a lot of work happening across the space to make it happen. In Nigeria, for example, they've had a recent shift where they've moved away from subsidizing petrol and diesel, and so that policy change has really led to an increasing uptake in small-scale renewable energy in the country, because they are very reliant on petrol and diesel generators for their electricity use at a household level and at a production level. But again, this change has meant that renewable energy is much more cost-effective. So it's just galvanized that change almost unintentionally, but it has helped the growth of renewable energy uptake. We have a program under our T umbrella called ZGen, which is specifically aiming at switching out petrol and diesel gensets, as we call them, so your Jennies, for renewable energy solutions. So that's a really good innovation that we've seen take off since that policy change in Nigeria. So I do think that there are changes, in some cases intentional in terms of policy, in some cases unintentional. There's just a policy change for maybe another reason, but it has helped increase and galvanize the uptake of renewable energy.
The green economy in particular, in general, and then carbon markets in particular, these are really nascent sectors still. What is your vision for what this can mean for the future of economic development on the continent?
So I do think the green economy presents unique opportunities for the continent. I mean, it's often been said that South Africa has an abundance of natural resources in terms of the green economy. And so yes, across the continent there is an abundance of solar and wind resources, obviously for renewable energy generation. But again, it's also been said without too much detail that we have a lot of the critical minerals that are necessary for a lot of these new technologies. So I mentioned, I think, data centers earlier. I've heard even at this conference, there's a lot of opportunities around these really big data centers as everybody shifts to the cloud and we move to AI and all of these things. And so the demand for these critical minerals for renewable energy technologies, but also for ICT growth, all of that, will continue to grow. So that does present an opportunity for the African continent to be able to meet that demand. And I think it's really important that we do that in a sustainable way. And so looking at solutions around things like climate smart mining, net zero mining, so ensuring that our operations don't essentially kick the can up the road in a sense and just shift some of the emissions problems and even socioeconomic problems up the value chain towards the extraction to meet this demand that everybody sees as green and good. We need to be very mindful and careful around that, but enormous opportunities. I think as well there are opportunities around manufacturing and production as well. Again, we have a lot of people across the continent who are looking for work. This is in some ways very medium skilled labor that's required in a sense to roll out the manufacturing for a lot of the components and that to do a lot of the beneficiation of these minerals. And so again, there's opportunities, if designed correctly, to look at creating green hubs, green industrial hubs. So looking at something like our SEZ model, but coupling that specifically with green industrial use, and that helps then diversify our manufacturing and economic opportunities as well into these new areas. So significant opportunity there. In terms of carbon markets, as you say, quite nascent. I think, again, there is quite a lot of carbon credit raising programs and projects across Africa. There has been quite a bit of backlash recently just around double counting of these, whether they are actually benefiting local communities. So there's been a lot more scrutiny in the voluntary carbon markets that's been looking at this. So there is the, I want to say the IVCM, I might be getting the acronym wrong, but they're an international voluntary organization that sets out some really good, there's 10 guiding principles for the good governance of voluntary carbon markets, and more standards are ensuring that they align with these things, particularly around the additionality. So where is the additional benefit to these carbon credit raising programs, both in terms of socioeconomic lens, but also in making sure that there is a permanent emissions reduction, because that was another question, is whether some of these projects do result in a permanent emission reduction. So I think that's good that the scrutiny is increasing. It does mean that there is the opportunity for more and more carbon credits to be raised in a good and sustainable way. More locally, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange a couple of years ago released a platform to trade carbon credits, so that's also quite good. I believe that they are starting to trade across that platform and getting some good traction in that space. So I do think it's absolutely growing, particularly the voluntary market space, and linking up with international markets as well, which is quite good. Again, I think in principle, carbon credits should be a last mile decarbonization mechanism, and by that I mean there's a lot of opportunities for real decarbonization of looking at your own production, looking at your electricity use, and so through our work we always encourage entities to leverage all the mechanisms for real emission reductions as far as possible before they try and leverage credits.